there's a global war going on, and it's not a typical one that involves only the foot soldiers and the roaring thunder of high-energy munitions. The shadow wars of the 21st century are being conducted in the terrestrial, aerial, maritime, subterranean and extraterrestrial battlespace, which involve the maximum use of economic, political, kinetic, psychological, chemical, biological, cyberspace and electromagnetic warfare. The Western deep state is seeking a full-spectrum dominance. The Eastern Alliance is waging a full-spectrum countermeasure. This is the Covert Hybrid World War III. The Western deep state's quest for full-spectrum dominance, amidst an advancing multipolar world. Who will win in the war between hegemony and multipolarity?
Thank you for joining us on this Sunday. I'm Cecilia Vega in for Tom Llamas. We begin tonight with breaking news overseas. For the first time, a U.S. fighter jet has shot down a Syrian warplane. The details are just coming in. The Pentagon says the Syrian plane bombed U.S.-backed forces battling ISIS in the northern part of the country. President Trump has been briefed on the situation. We want to get right to retired Colonel and ABC News contributor Steve Gagnier joining us from Washington. Steve, the Pentagon says this was in self-defense?
Steve, for the first time in almost 20 years, a U.S. aircraft has shot down another manned aircraft. This afternoon in the skies over Syria, the U.S. watched as the Syrian jet bombed.
Our aircraft was downed at lunchtime today near the Syrian city of Raqqa, when it was fulfilling its mission against Daesh, according to the Syrian army statement. In response to the highly provocative shooting down of the Syrian aircraft, the Russian Ministry of Defense suspended all deconfliction agreement with the US-led coalition. This means that all non-Syrian assets will be targeted and fired upon by the S-400 air-to-air missile system already in Syria. Not to be misconstrued as showing weakness, a NATO F-16 fighter jet has tried to approach the Russian defense minister's plane above the neutral waters of the Baltic Sea on June 21, 2017. The plane was subsequently warded off by a Russian Su-27 escorting the minister's aircraft. How did it come to this? Why would a NATO F-16 fighter jet try to harass the Russian defense minister's plane above the neutral waters of the Baltic Sea on June 21, 2017? What motivated the uninvited United States forces to shoot down a Sukhoi 22 Syrian army plane in Syrian airspace? Why would the United States be willing to take the battle to the Russians when it is claiming that it is there in Syria specifically to fight against the Islamic State terrorists, as the Western mainstream media continue to say? On June 16, 2017, the Russian Defense Ministry announced the possible death of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and 30 mid-level Daesh commander. As a result of the Sukhoi 35 and Sukhoi 34 airstrikes, high-ranking commanders of the terrorist groups who were part of the so-called IS military council, as well as about 30 mid-level field commanders and up to 300 militants of their personal security, have been killed, the MOD statement reads. Indeed, the Russians have committed a number of unforgivable crimes in the eyes of the Western deep state. It has intruded on its plan to exploit the Syrian oil and its huge natural gas deposit located at the Levant Basin. The Levantine Basin is a rich hydrocarbon area and one of the world's larger offshore gas finds of the past decade. It has an advertised natural gas reserves of more than 40 trillion cubic feet. The discovery was claimed by the Texas-based Noble Energy, which based its own estimate from the United States Geological Survey (USGS) assessment in 2010, that the province has an estimated mean undiscovered, technically recoverable reserves at 122 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 1.7 billion barrel of oil and natural gas liquids. The gas find is one of the primordial motivations of the Greater Israel Plan, which aims at annexing Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and portions of Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and with high probability, Iran. All of these countries are either being attacked by proxy terrorists right now, or are hosting terror cells that are ready to be activated. The Hegemony plan is an Israeli strategic plan to ensure Israeli regional superiority. It insists and stipulates that Israel must reconfigure its geopolitical environment through the balkanization of the surrounding Arab states into smaller and weaker states, according to Mahdi Dario's Nazem Roaya. The Greater Israel Plan can also be considered as a continuation of Britain's colonial design in the Middle East that is ultimately serving the Vatican Crown's own appetite for absolute temporal power through the financial infrastructure of the Rothschild banking dynasty and the military-industrial complex. Certainly, the men behind the charitable Vatican Church, which is also a corporate bank, don't want you to realize that they are also craving for temporal power and infinite material wealth. It's absolutely, well, ungodly. So, when Putin announced the nationwide ceasefire in Syria, Russia angered the deep state again.
Michael Morell, a former CIA director, said Russian soldiers should be killed in Syria to solve the crisis in the country.
We need to make the Iranians pay a price in Syria. We need to make the Russians pay a price. The other thing I would do...
We make them pay the price by killing Russians?
Yes.
Michael Morell added that the killing of Russians should be done covertly, but in such a way that the Kremlin would get the message.
The Russian ambassador to Turkey, Andrei Karlov, was giving a speech at an Ankara art gallery when he was shot in the back. The gunman shouting slogans including "Don't forget Aleppo" was an off-duty police officer, apparently posing as a bodyguard.
While the CIA covert attacks on the Russian diplomatic corps around the world have been decisive, the United States military leadership is equally upping the ante.
We'll stop you, and we will beat you harder than you've ever been beaten before. Make no mistake about that. Other countries, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, went to school on us. They closely watched how we fought in '91 and '03.
This was a battalion-wide mission.
And then the situation turned deadly.
Come on, fire.
We heard the Apaches firing.
Ethan and his infantry squad began running toward the scene to provide support. Again, the Apache helicopter opened fire.
Come on.
When he arrived on the scene, the Apache guns were quiet. The accused enemies were dead.
I just drove over a body. Yeah.
One guy's head, the top of his head was completely off, and his brains were on the ground, and the smell still haunts me today. I don't even know how to describe it.
When he approached the van, a noise Ethan wasn't expecting, a cry of a little girl.
10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
They are rapidly modernizing the military today to avoid our strengths in hopes of defeating us at some point in the future. Recently, a senior Russian official, ambassador to the United Kingdom, Alexander Karamenko, he said, quote, "The established world order is undergoing a foundational shakeup with the Crimea, Ukraine, and Brexit."
Crimeans voted overwhelmingly to break away from Ukraine and join Russia in a referendum on Sunday.
We begin with breaking news. A stunning and historic vote in Britain. The decision to leave the European Union will have a profound impact on the economic, political, and social fabric of the world.
He went on to call for the dismantling of NATO and the European Union. And he said, quote, "Russia can now fight a conventional war in Europe and win. Our endgame now," end quote. We can now, and we will remain in the future, retain the capability to rapidly deploy and we will destroy any enemy, anywhere, anytime.
Just learning from our producers at the Pentagon that there has been a sizable launch of Tomahawk cruise missiles tonight. We're told over 50 of them in a single volley hitting targets on the ground in Syria. Our correspondent Hans Nichols is ready to tell us what they've been told at the Pentagon. Hans?
Still learning more on this, but here's what we know. There have been Tomahawk cruise missiles fired off of Navy ships in the eastern Mediterranean. They had a single target. That target was an airfield near Homs, which is a major commercial city. It was an airfield. Looks like there are more than 50 impacts. It just looks like the Tomahawks were fired. The goal there might have been to pock up the runway, maybe take out some Syrian aircraft. We're learning more as we speak, but this launch has happened against the regime of Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. This marks an escalation in an already very complicated war. We'll get back to you when we have more information. Brian?
Okay, Hans, just one more point here. In the Mediterranean, I believe we...
Stay tuned for the second part of this documentary. Don't forget to like, share and drop us a comment. This has been a production of the Covert Geopolitics at www.geopolitics.co. Thank you for flying with us. Support us at www.patreon.com/geopolitics.